Thank you for joining us for 3Bs on the Law podcast, hosted by Trisha Barita, Camille Canali, and Susan Dawson. Disclaimer, this podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only, not meant to provide legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, remember, laws change or they differ by jurisdiction, so this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 3Bs on the Law. Last week, if you've been paying attention to the news at all, you saw that a Florida jury, all done by Zoom, awarded a stripper who alleged that she was beaten up by two bouncers at the club she worked at several $100,000. And that got us bees talking about what are some of the pros and cons about a trial by Zoom. And I know I have some very definitive feelings about that. And I'm sure Trisha and Susan do, but I thought before I spill the beans on my feelings that I would ask Susan to share her feelings. And then we'll let Trisha, and I'm going to save mine for last.
Well, I think it's challenging. There's a lot of issues related to a Zoom trial, a lot of factors that you can't control. We have Zoom meetings and then there's technological freezes. The jurors, how do we stop jurors from getting distracted? It's interesting. I don't know what our solution is, but yeah, it's challenging. I don't do much litigation, so I feel bad for both of you two because you do quite a bit of litigation and what that looks like. What do you think, Trisha?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting challenges. Certainly when you're not face to face, you lose, in all things, not just the jury trials, right? We've all learned that, Zoom isn't quite the same, right? And so how do you prepare if you're trying to get a case ready for trial with the anticipation that you're not going to have that face-to-face interaction? How are you still going to be able to communicate, get across your story of the case for your client and, effectively argue your case in front of the court? And so I think juries can be a little chaotic sometimes anyway, because there's a lot going on. Trying to focus the jury on the evidence that you want them to remember when they're back in deliberation is important. And so how you kind of go through those steps are interesting. I think we've seen from a couple of these Zoom, trials where we're seeing them in the press that, the judges are trying to, like you said, Susan, stop them from going to the bathroom in the middle of, some important discussion. They're not as much easily controlled when you have them in a Zoom setting. But I think laying out ground rules and hopefully, having some effective way to sort of control everybody. I think there's also a concern of technology and confidentiality. Sometimes, when you're in the courtroom, it'll be a little easier for you to present evidence that may have confidential features to it. Whereas when you're doing it on a Zoom or a platform, one of the trials that I saw where they were trying Zoom in Texas, they were using it as broadcasted on YouTube, right? Well, when you're on YouTube and Zoom, the security things are a lot different than being, of course, in person. So I think the security is a concern. I think how you present the evidence is going to be very different. And that's always concerning because you just don't know how the jury's going to take it. And there's not enough information out there about Zoom trials for attorneys to kind of work through those issues. It's going to be a lot of trial by fire, right?
You got it. And I actually have a kind of a bigger picture issue in terms of selecting your jury via Zoom, because, you're kind of only with like the chest up view on Zoom most of the time. And so, sometimes it's not just what a juror says in answer to a question during voir dire, but it's how they say it and it's what their body language says. And I often look for jurors when I'm questioning them as I want a juror who seems open, at least to what I'm going to say, and someone who's not closed off and has their arms crossed or their legs crossed, or they seem distracted. And you lose all of that body language when you're selecting a jury over Zoom. And so I think that is going to be a struggle as well. You also can't tell, like, for example, I have my cell phone sitting, here because I have notes on it for this podcast. And I don't think maybe you can to, a discerning audience member can tell that I glance at it every once in a while. But I think most people don't pay attention to that. And I think that even on Zoom calls, I do it myself. I have an iPad sitting next to my computer and I'll monitor my emails while I'm on a Zoom call. And I don't see how we can control those outside forces and make sure that a juror is really paying attention to our case and the evidence that's presented. And as a defense lawyer, sometimes that evidence is what's really important in exonerating my client from a case, much so than the story that the plaintiff tells. So that's kind of a different perspective. And one of the issues that I see with Zoom is, how do you select your jury? I know the plaintiff's bar here has spent a lot of time training their lawyers on how to do Zoom trials. And despite the fact that at least here in California, we haven't started civil trials by Zoom yet, nobody knows whether that may or may not be the case. I don't know how it is in your states. Trisha, how's it in Texas?
Well, they're certainly playing around with Zoom for a lot of things, right? It was the first time for the Texas Supreme Court to do anything in a virtual setting. I think we're a little conservative about some of that stuff here. Our rules are have been in place a long, long time, and so that was I think a big change for just the biggest civil court here to actually start taking some type of virtual hearings. So that sort of trickled down to them sort of, now we've seen some orders by some judges delaying, and saying this is how we want depositions conducted. How it's all going to play out in trials, we have had a few where they've, by criminal, they've tried, looking at the Zoom and using it for a jury trial. There was a civil case in Dallas where they did do a non-binding one, and so they're interested in it. Maybe everyone's got their eye on Florida because Florida's been out there trying to figure it all out for us. But is there any positives to the Zoom? What do you guys think about that?
I think the one big positive is it allows people to get their cases heard in a more timely manner, especially if COVID stretches into 2021. I know we've talked a couple times that, Trisha, I know you've said you thought COVID was going to end on December 31st.
I didn't say that. I said people have told me that.
I'm teasing you. But I think that if COVID stretches out and we're still in quarantine, that the reality of more and more civil jury trials via Zoom, that may become a reality. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Maybe the jurors will like it better. What do you think, Susan?
Well, there's nothing fun about sitting in a courtroom for hours and hours and hours on end. At least you're in your house in a comfortable seat, I guess, right? They have jury trials, as far as I'm aware. They have been some jury trials here, and you'd have to ask the litigators about how the jurors seem to like it. I know for myself, I'd probably prefer that, but again, I'd be distracted the whole time. I know me. I wouldn't be focused. I'm really focused.
We're not going to disagree with you.
Don't pick Susan to be on your jury for
I'm
sure.
distracted. No one wants me on a jury. So I can't imagine the struggle that litigators would have in today's day and age trying to get people's attention. I almost wonder too, we have a hard enough time getting jurors to understand that TV is not reality. And now if you're doing the trial through a mode of communication that looks like TV, does it make it worse, Camille? Right?
I think that you miss that, a lot of times in trial, you do try to monitor what the jury's paying attention to and who's nodding to what you're, saying, and meaning they understand what you're saying, not necessarily that they agree with you. And I think when you're trying to watch 12 people on Zoom, I just don't see how you get that whole picture. Like when you're standing up, at the lectern cross-examining someone and you can see the juror out of the corner of your eye, and now you're trying to do that on Zoom. I have a trouble.
Yeah, it's a little awkward.
Watching the two of you on
what?
the podcast, much less trying to focus on, the judge, the witness, my co-counsel, and 12 jurors, plus, however many alternates you get. So,
there's going to be experts on this. They're going to be the expert. They'll be on there with you watching them.
I guarantee you they're
That's
jury
what I'm thinking. Yeah, there already are jury consultants, right? I mean,
Right.
This might be a time where they say, now you absolutely need us, and we have this expertise in monitoring them from a Zoom perspective.
Yeah, they got to pivot somehow. So I could see it. Now, let me ask you about the deliberation thing. Have either one of y'all been on a jury before?
No, I've never been selected. Shocker.
I know. So people listening that aren't lawyers, they don't know that we're pretty much always struck right at the beginning. Nobody wants a lawyer on their jury. I ended up getting to be on a small criminal jury once, and it was only because I was very quiet, and there was a lawyer 5 seats in front of me, and the lawyer got struck, and I ended up getting on the small. But I think the deliberation, having just to experience that, of course, I didn't want to say anything. I just wanted to watch everything because it's just a very special moment. Lawyers don't get on juries, but I participated and did my jury duty process, of course. But it's an interesting sort of thing, and to deliberate in Zoom, does that change things? There's a dynamic there that goes on. Someone is picked to be the head juror, and then and that's usually the person that's probably most forward, sort of take the reins. Let's kind of talk about the evidence or talk about the issues, and how does that all kind of work out? Some people are quieter on Zoom. I feel like they don't feel like they can voice themselves. Is that change when they're not in person? Does that affect your jury?
Well, and does your distraction of other things around you also affect your participation in the deliberations? I mean, I'm going back to that. Wait a
minute. The jurors aren't as motivated because they're in their own house, whereas when they're stuck in the courtroom on a Friday afternoon, maybe
there's distractions at home. Whereas, when you are in the courtroom, the judge normally has good control and keeps everybody paying attention and things moving along. And I think that is more difficult for the judge and the court staff as well via Zoom.
Yeah. How do you do some of the, approach the bench, Your Honor, stuff through Zoom, right? I mean, how does that work? I'm curious, and sometimes there's strategies. Now, again, okay, maybe I'm going into an area that's not mine. You stop me, both of you, because, I don't do the litigation. The commercial litigation that I do is largely behind the scenes. I'm not in trial. I've never been to trial. I support trial counsel when I'm representing my clients, and I stay in the litigation from a commercial attorney, corporate attorney, knowing the laws and helping with the strategy, but I don't argue in front of the judge. But there is a strategy to when you object and when you don't, when you go up to the judge, when you do some of these things. There's a bit of a show. It's not quite like what you see on TV, but there's still a bit of a show that you can't do on Zoom, right? So the attorney that figures out first how to pivot the best and make it do all of that on Zoom is going to be, ahead of the game, I guess. What do you think?
I think that it's one of those things that we're going to figure out as we get in there. There definitely is a strategy to objecting and approaching. And I don't know that my strategy with respect to that would change too much via Zoom, but I also am not sure what the disruption would look like, because I assume we would all have to go into a separate room with the court reporter.
Right.
The judge, opposing counsel, and the court reporter to have that private conversation at the bench. And so I'm not quite sure what that would look like until we get in there and see for ourselves.
It'll be interesting. Maybe after you guys have done a couple of these, we can come back and do another show and talk about kind of a little bit more about that experience, or not, maybe.
My hope is we're back to live jury trials. I think I believe in the legal system, and I believe most of the time anyway, jurors get it right. So with that, thank you so much for joining us on this session of 3Bs on the Law. We hope to see you again soon. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us on today's podcast of 3Bs on the Law. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. We also welcome any comments. If you'd like to get in touch with us or suggest a future topic, you can email us at 3threebeesonthelaw@gmail.com. And because we're lawyers, we need to remind you that this podcast is not meant to provide you with legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.